Today, in October 2020, most of the energy we use in the world and most of the electricity we consume comes from fossil fuel. And with fossil fuel comes gigatons of CO2 emissions every year pumped into the atmosphere, causing climate change. So the question is, how do we fight climate change? And in the energy sector, this fight relies on two pillars. The first one is the production of clean electricity. We need to decarbonize our electricity. And the second pillar is we need to find substitutes for the fossil fuels we use today, every day, in transport, in heating, in our industrial sectors. And today, I would like to talk to you about hydrogen as that possible substitute fuel for the future energy needs. So hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and actually is around us in many forms, and in particular in water. And in my talk, I will explain how, with clean electricity, you can split water to produce clean hydrogen. So a little bit about hydrogen. Hydrogen was discovered several centuries ago by an English gentleman called Cavendish in 1766. One of the main components of a synthetic fuel that was manufactured in the 19th century called town gas, made from the distillation of coal and wood. And that town gas was used to light our cities, our streets, was also used for heating. It was gradually replaced by electricity, which was more convenient, and by natural gas later on for heating purposes. But hydrogen is still used intensely, and has been used intensely in the last decades in industry, in the steel sector, in the petrochemical industries, and also in the food industries. But its use in the everyday life, in transportation, for example, has been very limited. Around 2005, 2004, there was a wave of interest in hydrogen. People thought this is the advent of the hydrogen economy. Cars will be powered by hydrogen in the future. There was great hope. Car manufacturers were designing cars with fuel cells, but somehow this hydrogen revolution did not come. And why? In part because progress in battery technologies made electric vehicles a more attractive option. But this is not the end of the story for hydrogen. Actually, when you look at the fossil use today in heavy-duty transport, for example, maritime transport, or for energy-intensive processes like steel making, as well as in everyday life heating applications, we need a lot of fossil fuel. So how do we replace this fossil fuel? And could hydrogen be the substitute fuel? Well, the solution and the answer to that is yes, if we make hydrogen in a clean way. And unfortunately, this is not the case today. Most of the hydrogen produced in the world comes from fossil fuel also. I explained in my introduction that one way to make clean hydrogen would be to split water with clean electricity and go back to electricity as the center, as the main ingredient to the transition to future clean energy systems. Unfortunately, most of our electricity comes from fossil fuel. Of course, there are clean energy sources, clean electricity sources. Hydropower, for example, produces 18% of the world's electricity. Nuclear power, about 10%. And then you have wind, solar, and other renewable sources. And these low-carbon sources will be the ones that will be needed to decarbonize our electricity production. And with the transformation of our electricity system comes a lot of challenges. For example, we will need our future electricity systems to be flexible to adapt to intermittent generation like wind and solar. We will need electricity systems that are stable. Today we have grid stability that's provided by large thermal plants that have inertia and bring the stability that we need, the 50 hertz quality of our electricity that we require and that our electrical equipment require. We will need a lot of energy storage. Why? We will have intermittent technologies like wind and solar. So we will need energy storage when the wind doesn't blow or the light doesn't shine. And we will need dispatchable generation. What is dispatchable generation? This is low carbon generation that you can produce on demand, like hydro or nuclear. So once we have addressed all those challenges and have decarbonized our electricity system, well, that's only one part of the challenge to decarbonize energy. Because actually, the power sector, among all the energy sectors, is only responsible for 40% of our emissions. 60% of the CO2 emissions come from the other sectors: transport, industry, building, heating and cooling, for example. So having clean electricity can help decarbonize by electrification of those sectors, for those sectors that can be electrified. But we know that there are sectors, applications that cannot be easily electrified. And for that, we need substitute fuels. So the question is, hydrogen, can it be that fuel? The question is, can we produce hydrogen cleanly? And today, most of the hydrogen produced in the world, more than 95%, comes from a process called steam methane reforming. Produces CO2 based on natural gas. I mentioned electrolysis, splitting of water. Well, that's okay if your electricity is decarbonized. But if it's not, we have what is called gray hydrogen. Gray hydrogen is hydrogen produced by electricity that's generated by fossil fuel. So that has a carbon footprint. If you capture the CO2 in the process, you have what is called blue hydrogen, generated from electricity produced with fossil fuel and carbon capture and sequestration, which still has a carbon footprint. So actually the future is to produce hydrogen by splitting water using low carbon electricity, like electricity from renewables. This is called green hydrogen, or electricity produced from nuclear electricity. And that's called pink hydrogen. And there are actually other processes that are in development using other forms of splitting, high temperature steam electrolysis, or thermochemical cycles. They all use the idea of splitting water to produce hydrogen using either low carbon electricity or low carbon electricity and heat. And some advanced reactors, high temperature reactors currently under development, will be able to produce that hydrogen massively and in a more efficient way than today's methods. But electrolysis is still the basis of that transformation. So how does electricity and hydrogen work to decarbonize our energy systems? So let me explain using this graph. Imagine we have a power system, a low-carbon power system with wind power, solar power, and for those countries that use nuclear energy. So this system produces low-carbon electricity. And that low-carbon electricity can be used to electrify transport, heating and cooling in buildings, providing heating also to some industrial processes. So this is direct use of electricity. But we know that there are some of those processes that cannot be electrified. So we need a fuel. Electrolysis based on low-carbon electrolysis produces hydrogen, and that hydrogen is a clean fuel that can provide energy to these different sectors, including transport with fuel cells. And hydrogen can also be stored. This is important because it can be used later, or it can be transformed back into electricity using fuel cells. So this is really the basis of the coupling between the power sector and the other energy sectors, and how the transformation from today's world to a low-carbon future energy system. And industries and utilities in particular are looking at that and looking at the role of hydrogen. So why are they looking at hydrogen? Well, first of all, I mentioned that the electricity markets right now are not designed in the most robust, appropriate way. We know we have periods where we have excess electricity, and when you have excess electricity, the prices go down. They may even go negative. And so utilities that produce electricity have to pay to dispatch electricity into the grid. That doesn't make sense and is not sustainable in the long term. So really, the idea is to make use of that excess electricity when there is excess electricity and transform it into something that has value. For example, hydrogen. And the idea is very simple. Sell electricity when electricity is needed and has value, and sell something else, like hydrogen, when electricity doesn't have as much value as hydrogen produced at that time. There's also an important driver for industries and utilities to look at hydrogen, and that's the contribution to the energy transition and to climate change. This is not just a matter for governments to make pledges and so on. The private sector is taking also an important role in moving towards these low-carbon systems. And I want to give you two examples. The first is a company in the US, Arizona Public Service Company. This company operates the largest nuclear power plant in the US, the Palo Verde nuclear generating station, which sits in the middle of the Arizona desert. They also have wind, they also have solar power, and they have gas. And as a company, APS has made the pledge to become carbon neutral by 2050. So they have assets that are carbon-free, like nuclear and solar and wind, but they also have gas. Why do they have gas? Well, it's very simple. In the evening, when the sun sets, solar generation disappears. Yet the utility has to provide electricity to its customers, so that's when it starts its gas turbine to produce electricity. And to lower the emissions of the gas turbine, the idea is to produce hydrogen, blend it with the natural gas, and then use the gas turbine to produce electricity with a lower level of emissions. And in the future, those gas turbines could be designed to run on 100% hydrogen. So then you would have a completely carbon-free electricity generation system. The other example I want to give you is the example of EDF Energy in the UK. EDF Energy is contributing to the goal of the UK. The UK has set a target of being net zero by 2050 as a country. It's in the law. And the company is investing in low carbon assets. And in particular, it has plans to build a nuclear power plant in a site called Sizewell. And Sizewell is an interesting location because not far from that, you have large wind farms generating wind electricity. And also you have a large gas network system that runs past the site. So the idea is for this site to become a clean energy hub with low carbon electricity produced from nuclear and wind, and using nuclear power to produce hydrogen, either use hydrogen as a fuel or inject hydrogen into the gas network. And this is a feature of these changes of our energy system. The fact that the power and the gas systems are going to be more integrated, more interconnected, as hydrogen produced from low carbon electricity from electrolysis is pumped into the gas network. So is the future of our energy needs all about electricity and hydrogen? And I believe it is. And when I was preparing this talk, I was reminded of some books and novels that I read as a kid from a visionary science fiction writer from the 19th century called Jules Verne. Now, Jules Verne wrote a lot about electricity, and in one of his books, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, he even imagined a submarine powered by electricity, by batteries. But more relevant to today's talk is the sequel to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And that book is called The Mysterious Island. And in that novel, a character identifies hydrogen coming from the splitting of water as a fuel that will be able in the future to displace the fossil fuel that was used at the time, coal. So of course at that time there was no consideration for climate change, but I find it amazing that 150 years ago there was already a vision that the future of our energy needs will be met by electricity and by hydrogen. So to sum up my talk, yes, there is a future for clean energy systems. And it relies simply on two pillars, two actions. One is to decarbonize our electricity system with whatever low-carbon technologies countries want to use, whether it's wind, solar, or nuclear, or a combination of all of them. And the second is to produce hydrogen in a clean way, splitting water and using that clean electricity. Thank you.